He was known in every corner of the city, not for kindness or generosity or any quiet virtue, but for his laughter. It was sharp, loud, and sometimes cruel, echoing through rooms like a warning. People said he laughed to dominate, to remind everyone that he was above them. And in most cases, it worked. When he entered a room, conversation shifted, smiles faded, and attention followed him like gravity. He carried himself with the ease of someone who had never faced a challenge he could not crush with a word, a smirk, or a well-timed joke. Yet he did not see his laughter as a weapon. He thought of it as charm, entertainment, a natural gift that made others notice him and admire him, even as it humiliated them. On a particularly bright afternoon, he decided to visit a place he had never been before, a small community center tucked between the tall buildings downtown. It was the kind of place he usually ignored, the kind of place where he assumed everyone was ordinary, predictable, and most importantly, vulnerable to his sharp humor. He entered casually, scanning the room with a grin that carried a mixture of amusement and arrogance. People looked up at him, some with curiosity, some with a nervous energy that came from knowing someone like him had entered. He liked it. He thrived on it. Among the crowd, there was one person who barely noticed him at first. A young woman dressed simply moved with quiet confidence, her hand steady as she arranged some papers on a table. She did not rush. She did not bend to the attention his presence demanded, and that alone caught his eye. He was not used to being ignored, and it irritated him in a way he could not immediately place. He studied her for a moment, noting the calmness in her expression, the faint determination in her posture. She was ordinary, yes, in her appearance and her quiet way, but there was something in her eyes that hinted at a spirit he had not encountered before. He could not resist. Laughter, after all, was his armor, his shield, and his spear. He approached her with the easy swagger of someone used to getting what he wanted, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of playful mockery. "You look like you're working hard, but I wonder if it's really all that you can do," he said, his tone light but his words sharp. Around them, people chuckled nervously, unsure if they should laugh along or stay silent. The young woman looked up slowly, her eyes meeting his without a flicker of fear or annoyance. There was a brief pause, a moment where the air seemed to hold its breath. He expected her to stumble, to falter, to shrink under the weight of his laughter. That was what usually happened. People often stumbled when faced with someone like him, someone whose confidence and humor cut deeper than any harsh word could. But she did not flinch. She merely smiled faintly, just enough to show that she understood what was happening but had no intention of letting it affect her. The wealthy man laughed then, louder this time, a sound meant to echo across the room. "Ah, I see," he said, leaning slightly closer. "You think you can ignore me? Most people try and they fail. Most people don't last long in my presence. They crack, they stumble, they laugh nervously at my jokes. But you—" He gestured at her lightly, his smile widening. "You seem different. I like a challenge." The woman raised an eyebrow, her posture relaxed, her calmness a quiet counterpoint to his show of power. "Different," she echoed softly. "Or maybe you're underestimating me." That small phrase, so simple, cut through his amusement like a sudden chill. He had been expecting fear or embarrassment or at least a moment of hesitation, but here was someone who did not bow, who did not falter. His laughter, which had been his weapon for so long, seemed to stall in his throat for a moment as if it realized it had met a wall it could not easily break. He decided to test her. Not because he liked her, not because he respected her, but because he had to know if this calm, ordinary-looking person could be shaken. "I have an idea," he said, his grin sharpening. "Let's see if your talent matches your courage. Let's see if you can impress me." Because after the first notes of the music had filled the room, the wealthy man stood frozen, unsure of how to react. Every laugh, every smug comment he had ever used to assert control had evaporated into thin air. For a moment, he was nothing but a spectator, caught off guard by something he had completely underestimated. The young woman at the piano continued to play, her fingers moving with a precision and confidence that seemed effortless, yet every note carried weight. She was not performing for him, nor was she trying to impress the crowd. She was simply sharing what she could do, and that alone was enough to make the room hold its breath. The wealthy man could feel a mix of emotions swirling inside him: confusion, disbelief, and oddly a flicker of admiration. He had never faced this before. Usually when he mocked someone, he knew exactly how it would end. The laughter would rise, the target would falter, and he would stand triumphant. But this time nothing followed his plan. The young woman's calm focus and undeniable talent had thrown everything off balance. He found himself asking questions he had never asked in his life. Could it be possible that someone so unassuming could possess such skill? Could humility be stronger than arrogance? And most importantly, could he be wrong? The crowd began to shift its attention fully to her performance. Those who had been nervous, uncertain, or mildly entertained were now completely captivated. The music told a story that words could not, a story of dedication, patience, and quiet brilliance. Each note built upon the previous one, not with showiness or exaggeration, but with a steady rhythm that was impossible to ignore. People leaned closer, their eyes wide, their hands folding over each other in awe. The wealthy man could see their admiration, and it pierced him in a way he was not accustomed to. He had built a life around control and superiority, yet in this room control had slipped through his fingers like sand. He decided he could not let this continue without intervening. Not because he wanted to support her, but because his pride would not allow him to remain silent. "Stop," he called, his voice sharper than intended. The sound broke the rhythm of the music for a split second, yet she did not falter. Her eyes lifted briefly to meet his, and a faint, calm smile crossed her lips. It was not a smile of defiance, but of quiet confidence, the kind that suggested she did not need permission to be herself. "You're good," he said, trying to sound casual, though the words betrayed a mixture of surprise and unease. "I didn't expect that. Most people falter under attention, under pressure, but you seem to have no fear." She nodded slightly, her hands still resting lightly on the keys, ready to continue. "It's not about fear," she replied softly. "It's about focus, about doing what you know you can do, even when others doubt you. That's all." Her words struck him more than the music had. There was no arrogance in her voice, no desire to belittle him or anyone else. She simply spoke the truth, and it was humbling. He realized that he had never heard anyone speak with such calm honesty in his presence. The laughter that had once been his armor, his weapon, now seemed meaningless, a hollow sound compared to the substance of her talent and character. The wealthy man, unable to fully conceal his fascination, leaned against a nearby table, trying to regain some semblance of composure. But every attempt at control felt futile. The young woman began to play again, her fingers moving faster this time, yet with the same elegance and precision. The music flowed like water, sometimes gentle, sometimes powerful, but always captivating. It was as if she was telling the story of her life, the struggles, the victories, and the moments of quiet resilience that had shaped her into the person she was. The wealthy man could not help but notice how effortlessly she commanded the room without raising her voice or demanding attention. People were drawn to her, not because of his influence, but because of her own presence. And for the first time, he felt a pang of envy. Not for her skill alone, but for her ability to inspire respect and admiration without needing to assert dominance. He had always relied on laughter to create power, to make others feel small, to elevate himself. And now he saw that there was a force far stronger than mockery: authenticity, dedication, and genuine talent. Minutes passed, and the young woman's performance continued to evolve. The music shifted, carrying new emotions with each movement. The wealthy man found himself leaning in, listening intently, forgetting for a moment who he was or what he had intended to do. Around him, people whispered quietly to one another, sharing their astonishment, their admiration, and their surprise. Some even smiled, moved by the unexpected beauty they were witnessing. And he realized, with a mixture of humility and disbelief, that the room had changed because of her. He had walked in expecting to dominate, to laugh, to be admired, but instead, he was witnessing a transformation he had not anticipated. He decided, despite the discomfort it caused him, to learn more about her. "How long have you been playing?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The question was innocent enough, yet it carried the weight of genuine curiosity. She paused briefly, not out of nervousness, but out of thought. "Since I was very young," she said softly. "It has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. It's not just about music. It's about expression, about telling stories without words. It's about connecting with people in a way that nothing else can." Her words struck him again. He had always thought of talent as a tool, a way to impress or manipulate. But here was someone who saw it as a bridge, a connection, a way to share a piece of herself with the world. He felt a strange mix of shame and admiration. Shame for underestimating her, for assuming she could be mocked, and admiration for the strength and grace she displayed without a hint of arrogance. The young woman continued to play, her music shifting again, becoming more complex, more emotional. The wealthy man noticed that his own thoughts, his own preconceived notions, were being challenged in real time. He had come in expecting control, expecting to wield laughter as a weapon, expecting to dominate. And now he realized that all of that meant nothing. What mattered was skill, focus, and the courage to show oneself honestly, even in the presence of judgment. He watched her hands, moving effortlessly over the keys, and he began to understand something profound. This was not just a performance. It was a declaration of character. It was a demonstration that true strength did not come from mockery or status, but from mastery, dedication, and integrity. He felt a sudden urge to step back, to let the moment unfold without interference. And for the first time in a long while, he did. People around them continued to watch, some in awe, some in disbelief, and some quietly reflecting on what they were witnessing. The young woman's talent was undone after the first performance. The wealthy man found himself thinking about the young woman long after the room had emptied. He could not shake the image of her fingers moving over the keys, the way the music had flowed effortlessly yet powerfully, or the calm confidence that radiated from her, as if she belonged to a world far beyond his assumptions. He had always believed that laughter, charm, and wit were the measures of strength, but she had shown him something entirely different. He could not admit it aloud, of course, but a quiet, uncomfortable respect was growing inside him, mingled with disbelief and a hint of shame. The next day, unable to contain his curiosity, he returned to the community center. The bustling street outside was no different than any other day. Cars honking, people hurrying along the sidewalks, and the usual sounds of city life filling the air. Yet for him, the world felt slightly altered, charged with anticipation and unease. He wanted to see her again, not because he felt admiration, but because he needed to understand how someone so ordinary in appearance could possess such extraordinary talent. As he entered the center, he noticed her immediately. She was setting up a small practice space, arranging sheet music with meticulous care. Her movements were precise but unhurried, a reflection of her patience and dedication. When she looked up and met his gaze, there was no recognition of past judgment, no hint of the previous challenge. She greeted him with a simple nod and a quiet smile, as if the events of yesterday had been ordinary, nothing extraordinary at all. He cleared his throat and tried to sound casual. "I wanted to see you play again," he said. His voice sounded stranger to him than he expected, uneven and uncertain. She tilted her head slightly, curious but unassuming. "You want to listen again?" she asked softly, her voice calm and steady, devoid of any mockery or pretense. "Yes," he admitted, the single word tasting like humility. He did not know why he was there, why he felt compelled to return, but he could not deny the pull. He wanted to witness her talent, to understand it, and perhaps unconsciously to see if he could challenge it even slightly. She gestured to the piano, inviting him to sit if he wished. He hesitated. He had never been in a position where he felt uncertain, but now every instinct screamed that he was entering unfamiliar territory. Slowly he walked closer and took a seat nearby, observing as she positioned herself at the instrument. Her hands hovered over the keys for a brief moment, a silent preparation that seemed almost ritualistic. Then she began. The music flowed again, but this time it was different. There was a depth, a richness, and a complexity that went beyond technical skill. It was as if she was telling a story through every note, expressing emotions that were invisible yet palpable. The wealthy man leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. He had heard music before, of course, performances that were skilled and practiced, yet none had ever moved him like this. He could feel it in his chest, a stirring of something he had long ignored, an understanding that beauty, talent, and dedication could exist entirely independent of status, wealth, or charm. He tried to measure her skill, to find a flaw, a hesitation, anything that would allow him to regain his sense of superiority. But there was none. Every note was deliberate, every transition seamless, and every pause meaningful. The audience in his mind, the imagined critics and observers, would be silenced. No one could question her talent because it was undeniable. He realized with a pang of discomfort that this was not just about music. It was about character. Her focus, her humility, and her quiet strength were all evident in the way she played. She did not perform for praise, for recognition, or for the validation of others. She performed because it was an essential part of who she was, something she could not suppress even if she wanted to, and in doing so she commanded respect effortlessly, something he had never truly learned to do. As the piece reached its climax, the wealthy man noticed the subtle ways she controlled the dynamics, the way she allowed the music to breathe, to grow, and then to recede. It was not showy. There were no exaggerated flourishes meant to impress. Instead, there was artistry, a natural elegance that drew the listener in, making every note feel necessary and deliberate. He felt himself drawn into the rhythm, the flow, and the emotion, and he realized that he had been holding his breath unconsciously. The music demanded attention, and he could not look away. When she finished, the silence that followed was profound. It was not just the quiet of a room after music. It was the quiet of realization, of understanding, of recognition that something exceptional had just occurred. The wealthy man, still seated, felt a wave of emotion he did not fully understand. Pride, shame, admiration, and even a strange sense of gratitude mingled inside him. He wanted to speak, to say something clever, but the words failed him. There was nothing to say that could capture the depth of what he had just experienced. Finally, he managed to find his voice. "That was incredible," he said, his tone low and sincere. He had never used the word incredible in this context, nor had he ever meant it genuinely. Now it escaped him naturally, without artifice or pretense. She looked at him calmly, her expression steady. "Thank you," she said simply. There was no triumph in her tone, no hint of superiority, only quiet acknowledgement. For a moment he wanted to ask her how she had learned to play like that, to unlock the secrets behind her skill. But he realized that asking would miss the point. Talent, he now understood, was not just about technique. It was about dedication, patience, resilience, and the courage to express oneself honestly. He had spent his life relying on charm and mockery, never pausing to consider that strength could exist in quiet, unassuming ways. He shifted in his seat, feeling a strange mix of humility. After days of reflection, the wealthy man could not stop thinking about the young woman and her music. Her performance had unsettled him in ways he had never expected. He was used to being in control, to commanding attention, to using laughter as both shield and weapon, but she had shown him something entirely different, something he had never encountered before. Her talent was undeniable, but it was her calm, unassuming confidence that lingered in his mind. He found himself replaying every note, every gesture, every subtle smile, wondering how someone so ordinary in appearance could possess such extraordinary presence. The next time he returned to the community center, he did so not as a man seeking dominance, but as a man seeking understanding. It was a strange, uncomfortable feeling. He had never approached anyone with genuine curiosity or humility. His life had been filled with people who laughed at his jokes, admired his status, or deferred to his charm. But with her, there was none of that. He had to see, to witness, to learn for himself, because he had realized that he knew nothing about what he had just encountered. She was there, as always, quietly arranging her music, preparing for practice. When she noticed him, there was no surprise, no judgment, only a polite acknowledgement. He felt an unexpected warmth at her composure. It was a quality he had never appreciated before, someone who could remain grounded, steady and focused regardless of the circumstances or the person observing. "Hello," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I wanted to hear you play again." She nodded, a faint smile appearing on her face. "Of course," she replied calmly. "Sit if you like." He did, watching her carefully as she positioned herself at the piano. There was a sense of anticipation, though not the kind that he was used to creating. This time he was the observer, the one learning, the one silently challenged by her presence. When her fingers touched the keys, the music began again, but it was different from before. It was deeper, richer, more expressive. Every note seemed to carry emotion, memory, and intention. The wealthy man felt a stir within him, a recognition that this was not just skill, it was soul. He could feel the power of her music not as something to compete against, but as something to experience, something to respect. For the first time, he enticed the subtlety of her expression, the way her body moved with the music, the small changes in her posture that conveyed thought and feeling. He had seen many people perform in his life, but he had never seen someone command attention through presence alone, without arrogance or spectacle, and he felt a strange humility, realizing that he had spent so long assuming power through laughter, charm, and status, when real strength could exist quietly, beautifully, and without notice. The music shifted, becoming softer, reflective, almost meditative. He noticed the change immediately, feeling the emotional pull, the tension in his chest as he experienced the story she was telling without words. He realized that this performance was more than music. It was a reflection of her life, her struggles, her victories, and her quiet perseverance. He felt a mixture of admiration and guilt. He had assumed she was ordinary, that she would falter under scrutiny, that she could be laughed at. Yet here she was, flawless, unshaken, and unbothered by his presence. He wanted to speak, to compliment her, to understand how she had developed such extraordinary skill. But he remained silent, aware that any words would be inadequate, unable to capture the impact of what he was witnessing. Her music had rendered him speechless, humbled in ways he had never imagined possible. It was a lesson in patience, focus, and quiet strength, and he could feel its effects settling deep within him. As the piece grew more complex, the wealthy man noticed something else, the way she seemed entirely present in every moment, fully aware of each note, each pause, each dynamic shift. She was not performing for him or for the audience or even for recognition. She was performing because it was part of her, inseparable from who she was. And in that realization, he felt a deep respect he could not have anticipated. The room was silent except for the piano, and he felt a rare humility, a quiet understanding that he had misjudged so much about her and perhaps about himself. He had relied on laughter as a weapon, as a way to dominate, to create superiority over others. But he was learning, slowly and painfully, that true power did not come from mockery or status, but from talent, integrity, and authenticity. When she finished, he remained seated, unable to find words, feeling a mixture of awe and embarrassment. She looked up at him with the same calm expression, as if she understood the internal struggle he was experiencing but did not judge him for it. He realized then that she possessed not only skill but grace, the rare ability to remain humble and kind, even in the presence of someone who had sought to belittle her. He cleared his throat. You play beautifully," he said, his voice quieter than usual, lacking the arrogance that had defined it for so long. "I did not expect this. I underestimated you," she nodded softly. "It is easy to underestimate people," she replied, "especially when you judge by appearances or assumptions. But talent and dedication often exist in quiet places, in ways that are not immediately visible." Her words echoed in his mind, challenging everything he had believed. He realized that he had spent much of his life measuring worth by status, charm, and influence, while overlooking qualities that were far more powerful and enduring. He felt a subtle shift, a recognition that laughter, his primary tool, was insufficient against someone with talent, patience, and integrity. For several moments, neither of them spoke. He simply watched her gather her sheet music, her movements calm, purposeful, and unhurried. The realization that he had misjudged her lingered heavily in his chest. He felt the weight of his assumptions, his arrogance, and his reliance on mockery as a way to assert control. And yet he felt a growing curiosity, a desire to understand, to learn, and perhaps to change. Over the next few days he returned several times, each visit reinforcing the same lesson. He observed her practice, watched her develop new pieces, and noted the quiet determination she brought to every session. He began to understand the discipline required, the patience needed to refine each note, and the humility it took to remain grounded despite obvious talent. He saw how others respected her, not out of fear or obligation, but because of her presence and dedication. And he realized slowly and painfully that he had never truly known what respect meant. He also began to notice the subtle ways she influenced others. People gravitated toward her not because of her status or charm, but because of her calm strength and authenticity. She inspired others to focus, to persevere, and to believe in themselves. He saw that her impact extended beyond music. It was about character, presence, and the courage to be oneself fully. And in witnessing this, he began to reflect on his own life, questioning the methods he had used to command attention and the shallow victories he had cherished. One afternoon, as he observed her practice a particularly complex piece, he noticed a small smile cross her face, a quiet acknowledgement of progress, of mastery, of personal satisfaction. It was not meant for him or anyone else. It was a reflection of her internal fulfillment. He realized that he had rarely experienced such genuine pride in his own accomplishments. Everything he had valued, wealth, status, influence, felt superficial compared to the quiet satisfaction she exhibited. He began to understand that humility and authenticity were not signs of weakness, as he had long believed, but of strength. He reflected on his own reliance on laughter as a weapon, recognizing that it had often masked insecurity and fear of being truly vulnerable. Observing her, he learned that true power lay in dedication, patience, and the ability to remain grounded in one's talent and character. By the end of that day, the wealthy man felt a profound change within himself. He had come to the community center expecting to assert dominance, to observe, and perhaps to mock. Instead, he had been humbled, inspired, and challenged in ways he could not have predicted. Her talent was undeniable, but it was her grace, humility, and quiet confidence that left a lasting impression. He realized that this was only the beginning of a transformation. The lessons he had learned from her music and presence were not fleeting. They were reshaping the way he thought about power, respect, and human connection. He had learned that talent and character could not be underestimated, that laughter alone was insufficient to command respect, and that humility could be more powerful than arrogance. As he left the community center that evening, he felt a sense of gratitude he could barely name, not toward her directly, but for the lessons she had imparted without intending to. She had shown him a truth he had long ignored, that true strength lies not in mockery or status, but in skill, authenticity, and the quiet courage to be oneself fully. And for the first time in a long time, he felt inspired to reconsider who he was, how he had lived, and the kind of person he wanted to become. He walked through the city streets, the evening light casting long shadows, and reflected on what he had learned. He realized that he had been living in a world of assumptions, relying on laughter as a shield, and underestimating those around him. She had shown him that real power came from within, from dedication, talent, and integrity, and that humility could transform even the most confident person. For the first time, he understood that being humbled was not a defeat but a gift. It was an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to see the world and himself with new eyes. And as he thought of her at the piano, calm, focused, and unshakable, he felt a quiet determination to change, to approach life with a new understanding, and to carry the lessons she had unwittingly taught him into every corner of his life. The wealthy man's visits to the community center had become a quiet routine, though he never spoke of them to anyone. He arrived not to flaunt status, not to mock, but to observe, to learn, and to witness the young woman's dedication firsthand. Each day he found himself more fascinated, more humbled, and more aware of the flaws in his own assumptions. He had begun to understand that the world contained depth and talent far beyond what could be measured by wealth or laughter, and that humility often carried a power greater than arrogance. One afternoon he arrived earlier than usual. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long patterns across the wooden floor. The community center was alive with quiet activity, people setting up tables, tidying spaces, and moving with purpose. She was already at the piano, practicing a new piece. The music was soft at first, reflective, almost tentative, but it grew with steady confidence, unfolding into a story that seemed to fill the room with unspoken emotion. He sat quietly in a corner, careful not to interrupt, but his mind was fully engaged. He noticed everything, the subtle movements of her fingers, the way she leaned slightly forward during complex sequences, the small changes in her expression as she navigated each passage. There was a fluidity in her performance that was impossible to ignore, a grace that commanded respect without demanding it. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to assert control. Instead, he simply listened, absorbed, and reflected. The music shifted, moving into a section that was faster and more intricate. He watched, astonished, as her hands flew across the keys with precision, agility, and emotional depth. She was not performing for an audience. She was performing for herself, for the joy of expression, and yet the effect on anyone who listened was undeniable. He felt a mixture of awe and envy, but unlike before, it was not bitterness. It was admiration, pure and simple. He remembered the first day he had heard her play, how he had expected to mock and belittle her, confident in his superiority. That memory now brought a flush of shame, but also gratitude Gratitude for the lesson she had imparted without intention. Gratitude for showing him that true talent was inseparable from character, and that humility could wield a force stronger than laughter. He realized he had spent years measuring power incorrectly, assuming that status and charm were the ultimate tools. Now he understood that mastery, integrity, and dedication were far more influential. As she continued, the wealthy man noticed the subtle changes in the audience. Volunteers, visitors, and neighbors who had come for various activities paused to listen. Their expressions softened, their eyes widened, and their bodies relaxed, drawn to the music as if it carried them along an invisible current. He realized that her influence extended far beyond himself. She had the power to move people, to inspire, to captivate, all without a single boast or effort to dominate. The realization struck him hard. She had changed the dynamic of the space entirely. Where he had once assumed he would command attention, she now held it effortlessly, naturally, and with grace. It was not about him at all, and that more than anything was humbling. He had relied on being the center of attention for so long, believing his charm and humor were unmatched. But here was someone who had achieved it without arrogance or showmanship. He remembered the first piece he had heard her play, how it had left him speechless, and he now saw a pattern in her approach. Each note, each pause, each shift in rhythm was deliberate, not for show but to express meaning. It was as if she spoke through her music in a language he could feel, but not yet fully understand. The impact was deeper than he had imagined, touching something within him that he had long ignored, a capacity to be moved, to feel humility, and to acknowledge his own limitations. He wondered how many other moments in his life had been lost because he had assumed superiority. How many opportunities had he missed to learn, to grow, or to be genuinely inspired simply because he relied on laughter as his armor? That thought made him uncomfortable, but the discomfort was accompanied by a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, he saw that admitting he did not know everything, that talent and strength could exist beyond his assumptions, was not weakness, it was freedom. As she transitioned into another piece, slower and more reflective, he noticed the emotion behind each note. There was vulnerability in the music, a sense of honesty and openness that made it impossible to look away. He found himself leaning forward, listening more intently, aware of the quiet intensity that filled the room. It was a powerful reminder that talent was not just skill, but the courage to express one's inner self fully, without fear of judgment. For a long moment, he allowed himself to simply feel, to absorb the depth of her performance. He realized that in all his years of mocking and commanding, he had never truly experienced someone else's strength in this way. The lesson was undeniable. Respect was earned through skill, dedication, and authenticity, not by status, laughter, or charm. He felt a quiet determination stirring within him, a desire to change, to approach life with new eyes, and to recognize the worth in others before assuming superiority. When she finally rested her hands, the room was silent for a beat, as if everyone were collectively holding their breath. Then applause began, tentative at first, then growing louder as the audience acknowledged the beauty and power of what they had witnessed. The wealthy man remained seated, silent and deeply moved. He could not clap for himself, for he knew this moment was not about him. It was about her, her talent, and the lessons she had imparted. He stood slowly, feeling a mixture of humility and gratitude. She looked up, meeting his gaze with the same calm, steady expression she always had. He wanted to say something meaningful, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he offered a simple nod, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. She returned the gesture, understanding as always, but not making it about pride or superiority. In the following days, he began to reflect on how this experience had changed him. He noticed his own behavior shifting in small ways. Less reliance on arrogance, more awareness of others' talents, and a quiet curiosity about people he might previously have dismissed. He realized that the lessons she had taught him were not temporary but transformative. They had reshaped how he thought about power, influence, and the meaning of respect. He also began to understand the broader impact of her presence. People around her were inspired, encouraged, and moved, not because she demanded it, but because her authenticity and skill spoke for themselves. He saw how easily she could command respect without attempting to dominate, and he felt a quiet longing to emulate that strength in his own way. For the first time, he recognized that true leadership, true influence, was rooted in character and talent, not in mockery or status. One afternoon, he watched her teach a young student who had just begun learning the piano. The patience, guidance, and encouragement she offered were gentle but firm, helping the student grow without pressure or judgment. He realized that her talent extended beyond performance. It was a tool for inspiring and nurturing others, a gift she shared generously. The realization struck him deeply. She was not only extraordinary in skill but extraordinary in character, and he had been blind to it at first. The wealthy man began to apply the lessons he had learned in his own life. He found himself more patient, more reflective, and more willing to acknowledge the abilities of those around him. He no longer sought to dominate conversations with laughter or charm, but to listen, observe, and understand. He noticed the subtle changes in his own behavior, how people responded differently, and how he felt a deeper connection with the world around him. Through all of this, he continued to return to the community center, not out of obligation, but out of genuine appreciation and respect. He watched her practice, teach, and perform, each visit reinforcing the lessons he had internalized. He realized that her influence was not limited to music. It was a lesson in humility, character, and the transformative power of talent paired with grace. Finally, one day after another captivating performance, he found the courage to speak fully. "I came here thinking I knew everything, thinking I could control the room, the people, even the situation. I was wrong," he admitted, his voice steady but sincere. "I underestimated you, and in doing so I learned more than I ever expected. Thank you for showing me that strength, talent, and humility are far more powerful than arrogance or laughter." She smiled gently, a quiet acknowledgement of his sincerity. "We all have lessons to learn," she said softly. "Sometimes it takes someone else to remind us of what truly matters." The wealthy man left the community center that day profoundly changed. He had entered expecting to assert dominance, expecting to mock, expecting to laugh. Instead, he had been humbled, inspired, and transformed. He understood now that laughter was fleeting, status was fragile, and true power came from talent, dedication, and the courage to be authentic. And as he walked through the city streets, the evening light casting long shadows, he felt a sense of gratitude and renewal. The young woman at the piano had taught him a lesson that would stay with him forever, that underestimating someone could lead to the most profound realizations, and that respect, humility, and genuine talent were the truest measures of greatness. From that day forward, he carried the lesson with him in every interaction, every decision, and every thought. He approached the world differently, aware of the strength in others, cautious of arrogance, and committed to seeing talent where he might have once dismissed it. Her music, her presence, and her quiet courage had left an indelible mark, transforming him in ways he had never imagined possible. And in that transformation, he found a sense of peace he had never known, a recognition that true greatness was not in dominating others, but in appreciating, respecting, and learning from the quiet strength and brilliance that existed all around him. And curiosity. He wanted to know more about her, not to mock or challenge, but to understand. "You've clearly worked hard," he said. "How do you keep going? How do you maintain such focus?" Her hands rested lightly on the keys, and she considered his question thoughtfully. "It's not about keeping going," she replied. "It's about understanding why you start in the first place. If you play because you love it, because it's part of who you are, then focus and perseverance follow naturally. The challenges are still there, but they become part of the process, not obstacles to fear or overcome." Her words lingered in his mind. They were simple, almost obvious, yet they carried a truth he had never fully grasped. He had spent his life measuring success by status, wealth, and influence, believing that power came from being louder, sharper, or faster than others. But here was someone demonstrating that mastery, skill, and quiet confidence held a power far beyond mockery or laughter. The wealthy man felt a subtle shift inside himself, a quiet reckoning that he had not anticipated. He had come to observe, perhaps even to challenge, and yet he had learned a lesson in humility instead. The young woman's talent was undeniable, but it was her character, her patience, her focus, her authenticity that left a lasting impression. He realized that he had underestimated not only her skill, but the strength it took to cultivate it with such grace and consistency. As she began to play another piece, he noticed the way her eyes moved with the rhythm, how she seemed to anticipate the music before it even happened, how every gesture was purposeful yet natural. He understood in a way he could not articulate that this was not performance for validation. It was expression. It was the kind of honesty he had rarely encountered, the kind that could humble even the most confident person. The room, which had once seemed a stage for his dominance, now felt like a sanctuary for observation and learning. He watched, listened, and absorbed, realizing that the world was far larger and more nuanced than his narrow perspective had allowed. He had assumed power through laughter, charm, and status, yet here was evidence that true power could exist quietly, gracefully, and without fanfare. By the time she finished, the wealthy man had experienced a transformation he could barely name. He had come expecting to assert control, to measure, to judge, and perhaps to mock. Instead, he had witnessed artistry, dedication, and authenticity in their purest forms. The experience left him speechless, humbled, and profoundly aware of how little he had understood about strength, talent, and character. He realized that laughter, which had always been his weapon, was no longer enough. It could not reach the quiet confidence, the skill, or the authenticity that she embodied. He had underestimated her, and in doing so, he had learned a lesson about pride, humility, and the true meaning of respect. For the first time, he wanted to listen more than speak, to observe more than act, to understand more than judge. He understood now that the world contained talents, stories, and strengths he had overlooked for far too long. And as he left the community center that day, the image of her at the piano, calm, focused, and unshakable, stayed with him. It was a reminder that true skill, humility, and authenticity could leave even the most confident person silent, reflective, and forever changed, eyeable, and the wealthy man could see it. Yet it was her humility, her focus, and her calm presence that truly captivated the room. He realized that he had underestimated not only her talent, but the power of grace and authenticity. As the performance neared its end, the wealthy man felt a strange sense of anticipation. What would happen next? Would she stumble, falter, or falter? But she did not. She finished with a final note that lingered in the air, a note that seemed to carry the weight of her entire being. And the room was silent for a moment, absorbing the impact. Then slowly, applause began to rise, tentative at first, then louder, fuller, and more genuine than anything he had ever heard. People were not clapping out of obligation or fear. They were clapping out of admiration, out of respect, and out of awe. The wealthy man remained silent, caught in a mix of astonishment and humility. He wanted to speak, to say something witty, to reclaim his control, but the words would not come. He had learned in those few minutes a lesson that laughter alone could not teach. Power was not in mockery. Superiority was not in ridicule. True strength came from talent, dedication, and the quiet courage to show oneself honestly, even when others doubted you. The young woman looked up once more, acknowledging the applause with a gentle nod. She did not boast, did not gloat, and did not seek to make him feel small. She simply returned to her place, calm, composed, and quietly proud of what she had shared. The wealthy man standing nearby felt a shift within himself. He had entered the room expecting to dominate, to mock, and to laugh, but he was leaving with a newfound respect, a sense of humility, and an understanding that talent and character could not be underestimated. He realized that this was only the beginning. The young woman had not just played music. She had challenged his assumptions, reshaped his perspective, and reminded him that life had lessons far greater than the clever words he had always relied on. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he rarely experienced: genuine admiration for someone who had never asked for it, and a quiet humility that he could not dismiss. As the room began to settle, conversation slowly returning, he knew that the encounter would stay with him. He had intended to assert power, to entertain himself at someone else's expense, but instead, he had witnessed a lesson in grace, skill, and the quiet strength of a person who refused to be underestimated. And deep down, he knew that laughter alone would never be enough to prepare him for what was to come. Assure you, I am not easily impressed. People around them leaned in slightly, curiosity replacing the initial nervousness. Whispers traveled across the room. The wealthy man had never been this intrigued by someone so unassuming, and the crowd could sense that the balance of power was shifting, even if just slightly. The woman nodded once, simply and without hesitation. "Very well," she said. "What do you want me to do?" The man's smile widened, a mixture of triumph and amusement. He had already decided what to ask. Something that would, in his mind, expose her. Something that would force her into a moment of public failure. "Play for me," he said casually, as if it were nothing. "Show me what you can do." The room shifted slightly. Some people exchanged glances, wondering what she would play. Others watched his face, anticipating the familiar scene. The modest person trembling, faltering. The wealthy man's laughter echoing triumphantly. But she simply walked toward a piano tucked in the corner. She had not been there to perform, no one expected it. And yet she approached as if the world was exactly as it should be, and she belonged there as naturally as anyone else. He followed. Still smiling, still confident, still assuming victory. He could already hear the laughter he would deliver once her hands fumbled across the keys. He imagined the soft gasps from the crowd, the awkwardness, the humiliation. It was a performance he had orchestrated in his mind many times before. And yet there was something different this time. Something about the way she held herself, the quiet focus in her eyes, the calm steadiness of her movements. It unsettled him in a way he could not immediately name. She placed her fingers on the keys. There was a moment of silence, a stillness in the room that seemed almost sacred. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the expected stumble, the misstep, the moment that would allow him to unleash his laughter in triumph. But she did not stumble. She did not hesitate. She simply began to play. The first note was soft, almost delicate, a gentle sound that floated through the room. It was not impressive by itself, not yet, but it carried a confidence that demanded attention. He smiled nervously, thinking it might still be a prelude to disaster. But as the second note joined the first, something changed. The music grew not in volume but in mastery. Each note was precise, deliberate, yet fluid. It was not just playing. It was expression. It was artistry. And it was beautiful. His laughter faltered, caught somewhere between surprise and disbelief. The crowd around him shifted from nervous expectation to quiet awe. Whispers replaced laughter. People leaned closer, unable to look away. And he, the man who had used humor as his shield and his sword, felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. It was a strange mix of admiration and unease, a quiet acknowledgement that he had underestimated her completely. For the first time in many years, his confidence wavered. His laughter, once so natural, so powerful, was gone. He opened his mouth as if to speak, to deliver a witty remark, to regain control, but no words came. The music filled the room, sweeping over him, wrapping around the air like a gentle wave, and he realized in that instant that he had misjudged everything. This was not just someone performing. This was someone commanding attention not through status or wealth, not through sharp wit or ridicule, but through pure talent, through skill and dedication that he had never expected. The young woman's fingers danced across the keys, her focus unwavering, her humility intact. She did not gloat, did not smile triumphantly, did not let the moment become about her own victory. It was about the music, about the expression, about sharing something beautiful with the world, and in doing so she had done something even more powerful. She had disarmed him. She had rendered his laughter useless, his arrogance meaningless, and his assumptions entirely wrong. The wealthy man leaned back slightly, silent, humbled, and astonished. The room, which had once seemed a stage for his dominance, had shifted. The balance had changed. He had expected mockery and easy victory, and instead he faced a truth he could not ignore. Talent, humility, and quiet confidence had won where arrogance and laughter had failed. And so, the afternoon continued, with the music flowing, the crowd entranced, and him once so confident learning, for the first time in a long while, the weight of underestimation. Laughter, which had always been his weapon, was no longer enough. For now he could only listen, watch, and quietly reconsider everything he thought he knew about power, talent, and respect.